You won't believe this is the fate of a machine that once caused the deaths of millions. We found her beneath the snow, half buried like discarded machinery, her body barely visible against the pale white of Lycian III's frostbitten plains. One arm was outstretched, fingers curled as if she had once tried to crawl back to something, anything that remembered her name. Ridgefall Outpost was not a place known for mercy. People here patched wounds with wire and silence. No one rescued the broken. No one brought the cold inside. And yet Elias Thorne knelt in the storm, his hands numb as he brushed away the ice from her face. The first thing he noticed was not the faint glow at her temple. It was the shape of her hands. They were trembling. Elias had not meant to find anyone. He had only come out that morning to salvage scrap from an old crash site, hoping to barter copper or circuit boards for supplies. But fate, if it still operated in places like Ridgefall, had left something else behind. Not metal, not a drone, not an empty shell. Her. Elias was a quiet man. Quiet the way weathered wood settles into the frame of an old cabin. He had lived alone on the outskirts of the settlement for 7 winters, avoiding the fireside politics and backroom militia talk. People called him a fixer, sometimes a coward, sometimes a kind fool. He rarely corrected them. Most of the time he didn't care. But when he lifted her into his arms, he knew she wasn't meant to be here. Not anymore. She wasn't supposed to exist. The war had ended years ago. The HiveNet had collapsed, its vast lattice of biosensory constructs severed from one another and shut down. Anything that remained was considered a ghost program, or worse, a liability. They had been ordered to destroy the remaining units, the ones that breathed, the ones that might remember what they had been. But here she was. His workshop sat just beyond the ridge, half dug into the rock like a stubborn fossil. It smelled of ash oil and warm metal. Inside it was dim, the only light coming from a steady blue pulse beneath the floorboards. The geothermal core had held for years, a miracle no one questioned. Elias laid her on the central table, the one he used for repairing plasma coils and old heating tubes. He wrapped her in a thermal blanket from his field days. It was too big for her. She looked smaller in the fabric, like someone who had been forgotten by scale itself. Her lips were cracked, her skin pale but synthetic. Where her spine met her neck, he saw the faint imprint of an access port. Her pulse was low but steady. A heartbeat made by wires, not muscle, but it beat nonetheless. She stirred as the furnace clicked to life. Her eyes opened slowly. Silver irises refracted the low light in strange, mirrored fragments. Her lips parted, static, writing on her breath. Status? Inactive. Directive lost? She whispered, voice soft, unprocessed. Elias leaned closer. You're safe, he said. She blinked again, trying to focus. Query, is this deactivation? He hesitated. No, you're being kept warm. She closed her eyes as if that answer was enough to delay collapse. He sat beside her for hours after that, watching, listening to the soft hiss of her breath, the way her fingers occasionally twitched like a machine dreaming of purpose. She didn't ask anything more, and he didn't explain. Not yet. The next morning, Garen came. He was a broad-shouldered mechanic with an attitude forged from oil and cold judgment. His boots stomped against the metal porch, shaking loose frost as he banged on the door. Elias, you see the light trail out near the ridge. Elias didn't open the door, just the usual debris. We think something dropped in. Could be old Hive tech. Garen's voice dropped lower. Could be dangerous. Elias kept his gaze on the figure wrapped in blankets behind him. She hadn't moved. Nothing here, he said. Garen paused, then added, if you see anything weird, you tell us. Right, Elias answered with the same calm tone he used when mending broken valves. Of course. He waited until Garen's footsteps faded into the snow. Then he turned to her. She had opened her eyes again. You lied, she said quietly. I gave you time, he replied. He started repairs the next day. Nothing invasive, just adjustments. Minor sealant work where her frame had cracked from the cold. She let him know. She asked questions now. Why do you assist me? Because you asked me not to throw you away. She tilted her head. That was not a request. It was a system failsafe. Then I suppose your system has good taste. He meant it as a joke, but she didn't smile. Not yet. Still, her fingers relaxed slightly under the blanket. That night she stared at the steam rising from the bowl he placed in front of her. He had made stew. Crude. Too much salt. Not enough fat. but it was warm. She lifted the spoon slowly, awkward in the movement. Her hand trembled again. It tastes strange. Welcome to Ridgefall cuisine. She frowned. No, not the flavor. The sensation. It is unrecorded, undefined. He tilted his head. You mean, you like it? I do not know what that means. Ellis leaned back in his chair. You'll figure it out. On the fourth night, when the wind outside howled like a dying turbine, and the core throbbed low with exhaustion, she sat near the furnace without being prompted. Not like a device awaiting orders, but like someone remembering warmth. He asked for her name. Nyra, she said after a long pause. That was the designation given to my model. Echo 7 row. But that's not what I asked. She looked at him, blinking slowly. Then quietly she repeated Nyra. And for the first time it sounded like a name she had chosen. The next morning brought stillness. The kind is only found in places too cold for sound to travel. Ridgefall was buried in ice, the kind that crept into hinges and lungs and whispered warnings with every breath. But inside Elias's workshop, it was warm enough to thaw more than frozen skin. Nyra stood barefoot near the window, her balanced, uncertain frame slightly hunched. She pressed one hand against the frost-glazed glass and watched the pale light of Lycian 3 struggle through the overcast sky. Her breath left faint halos on the pane. Everything here is quiet, she said. Elias looked up from his cluttered bench. That's the idea. No directives, no protocols, no status queries. You say that like it's a bad thing. She hesitated. It feels unfamiliar. He set down the tools and crossed the room, slowly, his movements always measured like a man afraid to break things, not meant to be fragile. Unfamiliar doesn't mean wrong. Nyra's gaze didn't leave the snow. In HiveNet, unfamiliarity meant instability, errors, deviations from core behavior, and here it means life. Elias pulled a thermal wrap from the back of a chair and offered it to her. Try living instead. She took it, slowly. That too was new. The townsfolk had begun to notice. Ridgefall wasn't a place where things stayed secret. It only took a few days before whispers started. Elias is hiding something, some leftover HiveNet tech. What if it reactivates? What if she's dangerous? He knew it was only a matter of time before someone knocked on his door again. Garen returned first. This time he didn't knock. He walked right in. The heat rushed past him like a warning. Nyra was at the table, fingers wrapped around a mug of warm liquid, eyes wide. She didn't move. She didn't need to. The tension made the air brittle. Garen froze in the doorway. His eyes dropped to her collar, the network band embedded at the base of her neck. You kept one of those, he asked, voice low. Elias didn't rise. He calmly adjusted the kettle on the stove. She's not a threat. She's a HiveNet core conduit, Garen snapped. We burned those after the war. She's also freezing, half-starved, and hasn't done a damn thing to hurt anyone. She's built to infiltrate and override tech grids. You think it's a coincidence our southern relay flickered last night? Nyra flinched, Elias noticed. No one said the storm didn't do that, he replied. She's a Trojan horse, Elias. Doesn't matter if she knows it. That's what she is. Elias finally stood, slowly, carefully. She saved one life already. Garen raised an eyebrow. Who's mine, Elias said. That silenced him, for a moment. Then Garen turned on his heel, muttering something about protocols and safety thresholds. He didn't slam the door. That was the scariest part. After he left, Nyra sat silently, her mug untouched. Her eyes were downcast. I am a threat, she whispered. You're not, Elias said. I'm built to connect, override, adapt. I am... She hesitated as if searching for a word never given to her. An instrument. Elias leaned forward, elbows on the table. Do you want to hurt people? No. Do you want to control systems again? No. Then you're not a threat. You're a person. That is not how Ridgefall will see it. No, he said. But that doesn't change what you are. Her gaze lifted, and for a moment it was not the eyes of a construct. It was someone waking up from a life that had never belonged to her. Later that night, she asked to learn how to cook. Elias blinked. You want to cook? You said it's how people live. That's a broad definition. I want to try. So he taught her. He handed her flour, explained the ratios. She mismeasured 3 times, spilled salt on the floor, dropped an egg with the stunned expression of someone who didn't know they were fragile. And when the dough refused to form correctly, she panicked. Her hands locked. System override buzzed softly beneath her skin. Stop, Elias said gently. It's okay. Just breathe. I don't breathe, she said, stiff. Yes, you do. I've seen you. It may not be in your design specs, but it's in you. She looked down at the lump of ruined dough. It's not efficient. Neither is eating it, he said with a faint smile. But we do it anyway. Nyra's hands relaxed. The second batch didn't rise properly. The third burned. But the fourth strangely held its shape. It smelled slightly of yeast and something vaguely warm. When she bit into it, her face didn't change. Not at first. Then her eyes narrowed. It tastes like effort. Elias chuckled. That's the best kind. The next morning, someone painted red warning symbols on the front of Elias's door. He woke to the smell of scorched iron and the mark of the old War III vertical slashes, a warning that something dangerous was within. Nyra stood beside him, staring at it. Her face was unreadable. They want me gone. They don't know you. They don't want to. He glanced at her. Do you want to leave? She didn't answer. Instead, she asked a question of her own. If I were human, would they still be afraid? Elias paused. They might. She nodded, slowly. Then it is not just about design. It's about forgiveness. That he said is something people are slow to learn. She didn't respond, but later when he handed her the blanket again, she wrapped it around her shoulders herself. A choice, not an instruction. That evening, she stood at the edge of the outpost and watched the flickering lights below. The settlement was small, 30 families maybe, all trying to make it through another winter, all afraid of ghosts from the war, all too human. Nyra turned to Elias. If I connect again, I could make them less afraid. No, he said firmly. You don't have to prove anything to anyone. But maybe I want to. Elias didn't answer right away. Then softly, as he handed her a cracked ceramic bowl, he said, You don't need to be a solution, just be someone. Her fingers curled around the bowl like it was more than just warmth, like it was permission. The wind shifted. On Lycian 3, wind never really stopped. But this time it was different. The usual hiss became a deep, low roar, as if the planet itself had drawn a sharp breath. Elias heard it before the consoles began to scream. His fingers moved across the display, watching as values turned red one after another. The geothermal flow had spiked. Magnetic interference surged across the grid. The warning was clear. An electromagnetic storm was about to crash over Ridgefall outpost, and the entire energy system was moments away from collapse. If the core failed, the furnaces would die. The crops would freeze. The medical wing would go dark. There would be no heat, no light, and no second chances. And still in the middle of that growing panic, he felt something colder than the wind. Nyra had entered the room. She stood barefoot on the grated floor, her synthetic skin slightly flushed from residual warmth, her eyes already reflecting lines of incoming data from the flickering console screens. She said nothing at first. Then in a voice quieter than the hum of the failing core, she asked, How long do we have? Elias spun around. You need to stay here. I can help, she replied. No, it's too unstable. Her gaze remained fixed on the core diagnostics. I was a primary node. I know how to interface. I can bypass the damaged relays. Nyra, if you sink into that system, it could fry your neural lattice. You could burn yourself out. She paused for a breath that was not needed, but deeply felt. Maybe, but if I do nothing, everyone else freezes. Outside, the storm had begun to rise. Green arcs of static laced the horizon, writhing in the cloud cover like lightning trapped in silk. Ridgefall's lights flickered. Heating units sputtered. Families huddled close in silence, and engineers sprinted toward the central core chamber, shouting over the growing screech of failing machines. Elias ran with them. Inside the chamber, chaos bloomed. Control screens went black. Conduits overloaded. Emergency valves vented steam that scalded without mercy. Garen was already there, yelling into the intercom. The furnace levels had dropped by nearly 30%. If they fell any lower, there would be no recovery. Shut down the southern regulator. I said shut it down, Garen barked. We already did, one of the technicians cried. It's not responding. Elias arrived just as the backup grid failed. The chamber went dark for a breathless moment. In that darkness, Nyra stepped forward. No one had seen her enter. She walked calmly past the barricade, past the sparks, and past the silence. Her steps made no sound. Her presence stopped the shouting. She looked too human to be a machine and too still to be anything else. When Garen saw her, he froze. Get her out of here, he said through clenched teeth. Elias raised a hand. Let her try. She's a construct. She's not built for this. Exactly, Elias replied. She's not built for any of this. And she's still standing here. Nyra moved to the central conduit. The relay port at the base of her spine flickered with uncertain light, flickering like an old lantern caught in a gale. She lowered herself to her knees, placed her palm gently against the core, and whispered something too soft to hear. Connection established. The pulse of energy that surged through her made the entire chamber shudder. Her body arched slightly as if resisting the pain, then settled into stillness. Her eyes remained open, staring at nothing. The lights returned. One by one, the heating units roared back to life. The furnace grids normalized. The emergency relays stabilized. Outside warmth spread across Ridgefall as though a frozen breath had finally been released. She had done it. Nyra collapsed before the last alert faded from the screens. Elias caught her, his arms locking around her frame just before she hit the floor. Her skin felt hot, almost too hot to touch. Her breathing was shallow but present. Her eyes were closed. You should not have done that, Elias whispered. I had to, she murmured, barely audible. You didn't. You chose to. She blinked once, then faded into unconsciousness. He lifted her gently and carried her from the chamber. No one tried to stop him. No one moved. Even Garen remained silent, staring at the floor with clenched fists. She had not followed a protocol. She had made a decision. Back at the workshop, Elias placed her on the cot near the furnace. The warmth should have been enough, but she was different now. Her systems had locked down. Her biosignature was stable but distant. He tried diagnostics, tried pulse mapping, all failed. Then the message appeared. User override lock initiated. She had chosen to shut herself down, not from damage, but from control. The next morning the ship arrived. It descended without sound, a silvery arc slicing through the clouds, quiet and precise. The vessel bore the insignia of Nexus Prime, a symbol most people in Ridgefall had long since forgotten, the emblem of the HiveNet Central Authority. It hovered over the ridge like a decision waiting to be made. The people gathered, and Elias stood beside her. From the ship, a single figure emerged, tall, draped in filament robes, eyes glowing faintly with embedded neural code. The delegate stepped forward, moving with grace and purpose. Not military, not hostile, yet unmistakably powerful. We detected a signal from a primary node, the delegate said. We came to retrieve her. Elias stepped between them. Her name is Nyra. The delegate nodded. She was once Echo 7 Rho, a Class A construct of the HiveNet lattice. It is unexpected that she survived. She did more than survive. She saved this colony. She is still functional. We can restore her core systems, full access, full capability. She can resume her place in the network, free of confusion, free of error. Elias looked back toward the workshop window, where she rested beneath layers of cloth and warmth. The blanket was still pulled to her chin. She's not an error. Then let her choose. The words were simple, but they were heavier than gravity. The silence stretched. Inside the workshop, Nyra stirred. Her eyes opened slowly, not with the cold precision of a system boot, but the slow, bleary recognition of someone waking from a difficult dream. Her gaze met the soft glow of the ceiling light, then shifted to Elias, who was sitting in the corner with a mug in his hands. They came, she said, voice hoarse. He didn't ask how she knew. She was still connected in subtle ways. Even without a direct uplink, something deep within her could feel when the HiveNet drew near. They said you could choose, Elias replied. She sat up, the blanket falling from her shoulders. The movement was slow, careful. Her system had not fully recovered, and her body still twitched occasionally from neural discharge. And if I say no, they won't force you? Not anymore. Not with everyone watching. Nyra turned her head toward the frosted window. The ship still hovered there, quiet and clean. It had no weapons. No visible markings beyond the symbol of Nexus Prime. It looked peaceful, safe, cold. I used to dream of returning to them, she murmured. When I was first discarded, my code kept looping through recovery protocols searching for a signal. Any signal. I thought if they found me I would be whole again. She ran her fingers along her collar. The embedded circuit was still dark dormant. Once it had pulsed with life connecting her to a lattice that spanned light years. Now it was just a scar. But I'm not broken, she said quietly. I'm just changing. Elias said nothing. He knew better than to interfere now. The delegate returned at sunset. He stood just outside the door, his presence neither aggressive nor patient, simply expectant. I'm ready, Nyra said, stepping outside. She wore the thick winter coat Elias had patched for her. Her hair was still tangled from sleep. Her skin was flushed with the faint remnants of charge. She looked nothing like a Nexus Prime asset. She looked like someone real. The delegate gave a slight bow. You are not under obligation. However, if you return, we can restore your Prime function. Your memories, your efficiency. You will no longer feel pain or confusion. Nyra raised an eyebrow. No more confusion, she asked. No more conflict, the delegate clarified. Nyra glanced back at Elias. His expression was unreadable, but his hands were clasped behind his back. Steady, waiting. What if I want the confusion, she asked softly. The delegate paused. Clarify. Nyra took a step forward. The wind tugged at her coat. What if I want to wake up unsure? What if I want to learn how to cook badly, to burn bread, to mismeasure, to feel disappointed and then laugh about it later? That is inefficient, the delegate replied. That's life, she said. She stood at the edge of the ship's ramp. The lights inside hummed with the clean promise of certainty. She could feel the old familiar code in her mind, calling out like a heartbeat she had forgotten. It offered relief. Release from the weight of not knowing. She could return. She could be brilliant again. A perfect function. A perfect form. No more wondering what laughter meant. No more struggling to understand the word home. She took one step forward, then stopped, turned, and looked back. The wind pulled at her coat again, and her hand rose almost involuntarily to the small pouch at her hip. Inside it, the last piece of burned bread she had insisted on keeping. Elias had teased her about it, but she had wrapped it in cloth and carried it ever since. It had no value, no function. It was her choice. She stepped down from the ramp. The delegate said nothing. No argument, no threat, only a nod. You are choosing autonomy, he said. I am choosing to be someone, Nyra replied, not something. The ship remained for another hour, hovering in the same silent vigil. Then, as if satisfied, it lifted into the sky and disappeared into the clouds without a sound. Nyra stood there for a long time, watching until the last glimmer of light faded from the heavens. That evening, Elias found her in the garden. What they called a garden anyway. A patch of ground barely wide enough to support frost-resistant rootstock. But she had claimed it weeks ago, turned soil with trembling hands, planted seeds without knowing if they would take. He knelt beside her. She did not speak right away. Instead, she scooped a handful of soil and held it in her palm, letting the grains fall through her fingers like sand. Will they come back, she asked. Maybe. Will they try to reclaim me? Maybe. She looked at him. And will you stop them? Elias did not smile, but his voice was warm. I will remind them that you are already claimed, by yourself. For the first time she smiled. Not a programmed curve of lips, not a mimicry of emotion, a real smile. Soft, shy, a little uneven. She reached out fingers, lightly brushing his, not as a system interface, not as a handshake protocol, just a touch, and he didn't pull away. They sat like that as the last of the storm faded from the mountains, the horizon painted in blue and silver, and the world began quietly to thaw. The garden became her rhythm. It was not much. A narrow strip of gray soil tucked behind Elias's workshop, barely able to hold a few frost-tolerant roots, and a patch of stubborn blue-veined moss. But to Nyra, it might as well have been a cathedral. She did not know how to grow things, not truly. Her early attempts were uneven, sometimes too shallow, sometimes pressed too deep into the dirt. She didn't understand why roots needed air, or why plants didn't just respond to intent like code did. But she tried, and that effort, quiet and repetitive, became her form of prayer. Elias watched her from the porch, a chipped mug warming his hands, steam curling toward the frozen morning sky. She had risen before him again, her coat pulled tight, knees in the soil hair, still unbrushed. Each morning she touched the earth like it might whisper back. He didn't interrupt, not anymore. She needed this, and perhaps so did he. The rest of Ridgefall was not as quiet. Garen returned, this time not to threaten but to talk. He came with measured steps and a brittle look that did not quite pass for apology, but edged close. You really plan to let her stay? Elias nodded. She already decided. She was a Class A node, Garen muttered. You know what that means. I know exactly what it means. It means she was built to serve discarded when broken, and still chose to save us when we would have let her freeze. Garen looked away. You think the others will understand? Maybe not, but maybe they'll learn. There was a long pause. Then Garen shrugged, eyes still on the horizon. The northeast relay still flickers. Could use an extra pair of hands. If she ever wants to help. Elias gave a slight smile. I'll let her know. Garen walked off without another word. Later that evening, Elias found her curled up on the floor near the furnace. She was humming, not music, not code, just a soft pattern of sounds almost like the rhythm of her breath. Her fingers traced invisible lines on her forearm, as if sketching memories she hadn't yet placed into words. I spoke to Garen, Elias said gently. She didn't stop humming. He says the northeast relay needs work. I know. Are you listening to the comms again? No, she replied. Just remembering. He sat beside her. I've been thinking, she said after a long silence. Back when I was at HiveNet, everything was about optimization. Every second accounted for. Every task measured. My worth was tied to outcomes. And now he asked. Now I burned bread and planted things wrong and forgot to recharge my internal heater this morning. And somehow I don't feel broken. I feel strange, but not wrong. That's called being human, Elias said. She looked at him uncertain. Is that why you chose exile, she asked. Because you wanted to feel strange too. Elias let out a slow breath. I left because I was tired of being told what lives were worth saving. I patched too many soldiers they sent back into fire before they healed. Too many kids they called expendable. Ridgefall wasn't redemption, it was an escape. Nyra tilted her head, and now he glanced at her. Now I think I might be building something again. She touched her chest lightly, fingers brushing the base of her collar. Sometimes I still hear the signal, she whispered. Faint, like a ghost in my spine. It calls me back, not with commands, just expectation. Do you want to go back, he asked. No, but you still hear it. Yes, and part of me answers. He didn't respond at first. Then quietly he said, That's all right. You don't have to pretend you never were. You just have to decide who you are now. She nodded slowly, then added almost too softly to catch, I think I'm learning. The next morning she joined Garen at the Northeast Relay. It was an awkward meeting. Garen didn't speak much. He handed her a tool, gestured at the exposed panel, and grunted in approval when she began patching without needing instruction. They worked side by side in silence, wires sparking, and frost clinging to their gloves. At one point she hesitated. Her hand hovered over a conduit. Garen noticed. What is it? This part was designed to interface with my type. Still want to try? She nodded. He didn't stop her. The connection was light. No deep sync, no override. Just a diagnostic handshake. The panel flickered, then stabilized. Garen exhaled. Well, he said you're better than most of the junk I've worked with. Nyra smiled faintly. I'll take that as a compliment. You should. He passed her a thermos. Inside was lukewarm broth. She blinked at it. You expect me to drink this? Garen grunted. I'm trying. She took a sip. It wasn't good, but she finished it anyway. That night, Elias found her sketching on a spare datapad. Lines, curves, a strange spiral pattern. "What's that?" he asked. "I think it's a memory," she replied, "of the lattice, not the structure, the shape of connection. When I closed my eyes today, I didn't feel orders. I felt threads, soft ones, not commands, just awareness." She looked up, and for the first time, it didn't feel like a trap. It felt like a song I didn't need to sing anymore. He said nothing, just sat beside her as the workshop lights dimmed, and outside the first new sprouts from her garden poked up through the frost. Spring on Lycian 3 was a rumor. No flowers bloomed. No great thaw turned the valleys green. Instead, there was a subtle shift in the wind, a whisper of warmth hiding between gusts of ice, the kind of change you could miss unless you were listening carefully. Nyra was listening. Each morning she walked the garden, checking the soil with gloved fingers. Tiny leaves had begun to push through the frost-crusted dirt, stubborn and fragile like ideas too new to speak aloud. She counted them in silence. 3 sprigs of rootberry, 1 stunted stalk of blue vine, a single moss cluster spread shyly across the edge of the planter bed. To anyone else it looked unimpressive. To Nyra it was proof. Inside the workshop, Elias was soldering a corroded heat coil when she returned. 3 rootberry, 1 blue vine, she reported. He glanced up. Sounds like a feast. She walked to the shelf and pulled down 2 ceramic cups. If we combine it with optimism, maybe. He chuckled softly. You're getting good at jokes. She tilted her head. I've been observing your methods. Careful, he said. It might be contagious. She poured hot water into the cups and sat beside him. There was a pause. Then without looking at him, she said, I dreamed last night. He set the soldering iron down. What kind of dream? A memory, maybe, or something I invented. I was in a hallway made of light. The walls pulsed with data. All around me, voices spoke without sound. They were waiting for me to return, but I kept walking past them, toward a window. She sipped her drink. When I reached the end, I saw a garden. This garden, covered in frost but alive. And I remember thinking, the hallway never had windows before. Elias did not interrupt. It felt like the lattice was still inside me, she continued. But now it ends here, with the dirt, with the leaves, with you. The outpost had begun to shift as well. Children no longer crossed the street when they saw her. Adults nodded once in passing eyes, still wary, but no longer filled with fear. Garen in particular had softened. He now invited her to help with diagnostics on the older relay towers and pretended not to smile when she outperformed his tools. One afternoon, he asked her to recalibrate the satellite uplink. It's finicky, he warned. I don't like synthetic input. She placed her hand against the interface. The signal responded immediately clear and stable. Garen whistled. Well, you're a miracle. I'm just me, she said. Same thing sometimes. He handed her a toolbox. Are you planning to stick around for good? He asked. I haven't planned anything, she replied. Smart. They worked in silence after that. That evening, back at the workshop, Elias prepared dinner. It wasn't much. Rehydrated grain, a few slices of processed meat, and a sprinkle of moss flakes. But Nyra seemed content. She chewed thoughtfully, considering each texture, like every bite was a puzzle worth solving. Do you miss it? She asked suddenly. Miss what? The world before exile, the systems, the order, the clear paths, Elias considered. Sometimes, he admitted, not the orders, but the certainty, knowing where you fit, what to expect. It made things easier even if they weren't better. And now, he looked at her, now I don't know what tomorrow looks like, but I know I want to see it. Nyra reached for another piece of moss bread. That's the part I still find hard. I want things. You don't have to get it right the first time, he said. She hesitated. And if I never get it right, then we'll burn more bread together. She smiled. Later that night, she opened an old diagnostic shell, one of the ones she had used in her earliest days. It was still connected to her internal system, dormant and dusty, a relic of her old self. She stared at the flickering data interface, the readout still encoded in the cold, efficient HiveNet format. She ran a scan. Cognitive drift, 73%, emotional interference, active core, objective, undefined. She placed her fingers over the display. Then she deleted the interface. Not the data, Just the frame that once told her what she was. She whispered, "I know now," and closed the shell forever. The next morning she made breakfast. It was terrible. The eggs were rubbery, the moss flakes burnt, the tea was oversteeped. Elias tasted it all without flinching. Nyra watched, arms folded, waiting for his judgment. He swallowed, then said with a straight face, "This is definitely food. Is that your professional opinion?" "Absolutely." She narrowed her eyes. "You hate it." "I never said that." "But you're lying." He grinned. "That I will neither confirm nor deny." She laughed then. A real laugh. Not a program. Not a mimic. Something bright and unfiltered. He looked at her for a long moment. "That laugh," he said, "was worth every bite." She tilted her head. "You are difficult to cook for." "I'm difficult in general." "Then it's a good match." They finished the meal in comfortable silence. Outside, the garden grew. Tiny leaves opened. Sprouts curled skyward. And Nyra, once a construct of the greatest neural system in galactic history, knelt beside the soil and learned to grow things. Not because she had to, but because she could. The storm came without warning. Unlike the one that had torn through the relay systems weeks ago, this one didn't flash across scanners or send a preemptive hum through the ground. It arrived at midnight, silent at first, then sharp howling with icy teeth and no intention of stopping. The outpost lights dimmed one by one. Elias woke to the flicker of his bedside lamp. Nyra was already standing by the window, watching as snow curled and twisted in unnatural spirals across the sky. "That's not natural," she said quietly. "No, it's not." He reached for his jacket, already calculating backup procedures. The heating systems should have been stable. Garen had reinforced them 2 days ago. The uplinks had been patched and the weather shield hadn't shown any signs of malfunction. But now the generator lights are dead, and worse so were the geothermal regulators. Nyra turned to him. "Something's interfering with the core systems?" "Deliberate." She didn't answer, but her silence said enough. Within an hour, panic had taken root. The Ridgefall square filled with shouting as families huddled near communal heat vents and traders argued over emergency rations. The main power node had dropped below critical. Backup batteries gave them a few hours at best. And in the center of the commotion, Garen barked orders, trying to reroute power through the old engineering shell beneath the relay towers. Elias found him mid-argument with the technician. "You said it was stable," someone shouted. It was Garen, snapped. "Until something jammed the flow at the lower vents. These readings don't make sense." Nyra approached. Everyone fell silent. "She's doing it again," a voice muttered. Garen stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "You think this was HiveNet?" Nyra met his gaze calmly. "Not directly, but something is mimicking the HiveNet pulse frequencies. I can feel it." "Feel it?" She nodded. "Like a song I used to know, but it's out of tune." "Can you stop it?" "I don't know." Elias stepped beside her. "If anyone can, it's her." Garen hesitated, then handed her a cracked datapad. "Then let's hope you're right." The path to the core tunnel was nearly impassable. Snow clung to every surface, ice had sealed half the access points, and static buzzed in the air like 1,000 whispers waiting to become commands. Nyra walked in silence. Elias followed. Neither of them spoke as they descended into the tunnel. Pipes lined the walls like ribs. The air grew heavier the farther they went. At the final hatch, Elias stopped. "I can't follow you in," he said. "I know." She turned to him. "I don't want to lose myself again." "You won't," he said. "You can't promise that." He didn't try. Instead, he took her hand gently and placed a small data crystal in her palm. "If anything happens, this will log your last imprint. You'll come back." "I don't want to come back," she whispered, "if I lose what I've become." He gave her a soft look. "Then don't." Inside the chamber, the light was wrong. It pulsed in staggered intervals, no rhythm, no consistency. The HiveNet signal had always been smooth like breath. This felt like something breathing underwater. Desperate, distorted. She approached the core. Her internal systems began to react before she touched anything. Warning lights blinked in her vision. Signal residue, a corrupted frequency loop embedded in the magnetic lattice. Someone had sent a beacon, not to her, but for her. It was a call to return, a trap made of memory. Her knees buckled. Codes surged through her spine, 1,000 directives trying to overwrite the present with the past. Echoes of orders, long silence slammed against her will like waves. Reconnect, obey, interface. She screamed without sound and reached deeper. At the surface, the lights flickered once, then came back on. The storm broke in half winds dying mid-breath. The static that had choked the air vanished. Screens reactivated. Furnaces roared back to life. Garen stared at the monitor's jaw slack. She did it. No one cheered. They only waited. Nyra emerged 2 hours later. Her steps were uneven. Her eyes were red. Not from programming strain, from tears. She didn't speak. Elias ran to her, catching her before she fell. Her body trembled not from cold, but from exhaustion far deeper than muscles. I held on, she whispered. They tried to rewrite me, from the inside. But I remembered the garden, and your voice, and the taste of burnt bread. He smiled, though his eyes glistened. That's what saved you. No, she said. I did. That night she sat in silence, wrapped in a blanket, sipping tea that had long since gone cold. Elias watched her. Finally she spoke. They wanted me back. I know. They promised I'd never feel pain again. I know. She looked up. But I'd rather feel pain than be nothing. He reached out and gently placed his hand over hers. You're not nothing. I think I believe that now. Outside, the frost retreated slightly from the soil. The blue vine curled upward again undeterred. And inside, Nyra, once a ghost of a system, sat beside the man who never once asked her to be anything but free. The thaw didn't come all at once. It never did on Lycian 3. Seasons were more suggestions than truth. A wind that softened. A patch of dirt that held warmth a little longer than expected. But for Nyra, even that was enough. Enough to begin hoping. Each day she woke with a purpose. Not one assigned by a central directive or broadcast from a lattice of glowing minds. Her reasons now came with the smell of soil, the warmth of rising steam, and the soft weight of Elias's footsteps across the floor. She had made it back, but not as she was. One morning she found herself staring at her own reflection, not in a mirror. There were none in the workshop, just the surface of a still water basin outside its edges, crusted in ice. Her face stared back at her, familiar yet foreign. The synthetic flesh, the faint gleam at her temples, the seam that ran beneath her jawline like a thread someone had once pulled tight. She leaned closer, then spoke aloud. I am still here. Not a status report, not a diagnostic readout, just a truth. Later, Garen visited. He brought a package wrapped in cloth, hesitant as always, his voice caught somewhere between respect and discomfort. They're building a new outpost west of the valley, he said. Could use someone with your touch. Tech like theirs. Well, most of us wouldn't know where to start. Nyra tilted her head. You want me to leave? Garen blinked. No, I didn't mean. I just thought, if you wanted to, expand. Elias leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, watching them both. Nyra gave a small smile. Thank you, but I've already got roots here. Garen looked at her garden, then nodded. Figures. Before he left, he handed her a small envelope. Inside were printed photos of blurry, low-resolution images of children huddled near heat vents, an elderly woman holding a moss sprout, a group of engineers cheering around a relit furnace. Nyra stared at them, silent. They asked me to give you those, Garen said. Said, thanks. She held the pictures for a long time after he was gone. One evening, Elias sat beside her, legs stretched out before the hearth, his hands stained with grease and dirt. Do you miss the voice, he asked. Nyra looked up. The HiveNet. Yeah. She thought about it. I used to crave it. The pulse. The song. It felt like purpose. And now she smiled faintly. Now I like the quiet. He nudged her knee with his. Even my snoring, especially that. They both laughed. It was quiet, easy, human. The days grew longer. The soil softened. Nyra added a second row to her garden, careful not to disturb the existing roots. She began charting the weather patterns, studying the rhythm of frost and thaw like a language. Sometimes she sang to the plants. Just nonsense. Sounds that made her feel anchored. Elias listened without interrupting. Once he caught her sketching a small structure on her tablet. "What's that?" he asked. "A greenhouse. You thinking of building one? I'm thinking of trying." He leaned closer. "Looks ambitious." She met his eyes, so I was staying. He smiled. "Fair enough." One night she woke from a dream. She sat up, breath shallow, the blanket tangled around her legs. Her fingers twitched with remembered light, and her mind echoed with voices that no longer commanded, but still lingered. She stepped outside. The stars above were brilliant, scattered like codes across an infinite sky. She stood barefoot on the frost, feeling the bite of cold against her skin. Not punishment, not pain, proof. She was not inside a pod, not locked in a simulation, not waiting for commands. She was awake, alive, and this cold was hers. When she returned inside, Elias was waiting at the hearth. "You heard?" He nodded. "You breathe differently when you're dreaming?" She sat beside him. They didn't speak. Instead, they watched the fire. The next morning, she returned to the broken diagnostic shell she had nearly discarded weeks ago. She opened the housing, cleaned the contacts, and rewrote its primary function. Not to command, not to report, to listen. She placed it in the garden beside the first patch of blue vine. If the HiveNet was ever listening again, if they ever found her signal, they wouldn't hear a system rejoining its grid. They would hear the sound of frost cracking over new roots, and they would know she had chosen something else. By the week's end, her greenhouse frame was complete. Wooden supports, transparent poly panels, heating coils buried beneath reclaimed ceramic. It would take months before it was fully functional, but Nyra stood in the center of it, hands on her hips, and felt proud. Not because it was perfect, but because it was hers. Elias walked up behind her, carrying a bundle of wiring. "I brought reinforcements." She raised an eyebrow. "Will they complain like the last ones?" He shrugged. "Only if they work." They built in silence for a while. Then Nyra said, "Do you know the first thing I remember?" Clearly, Elias shook his head. "The sound of your boots on the floor. Just before you placed that blanket around me." He looked at her, and that sound, she continued, felt like home. In the days that followed, no one came from the HiveNet. No new ships, no signals, no demands. Just wind and frost and the quiet rhythm of a life not chosen for her, but by her. And that was more than enough. The first fruit came in the middle of the night. Not a full harvest, just a single swollen bulb of rootberry clinging to the edge of the moss bed with quiet defiance. Nyra found it before dawn, crouching in the frost, with one hand hovering over the soil as if afraid to disturb it. She touched it gently, warm, alive, sweet at the edges, a small miracle. She didn't speak, didn't run to wake Elias. She just sat there, knees in the dirt, eyes soft, and held the fruit in her hand like it was proof that the world could be remade one mistake at a time. Elias found her later, still outside, still silent. He sat beside her and looked down at the lone fruit resting in her palm. "You grew that," he said. Nyra nodded. "I didn't know I could." "Well, now we both do." He didn't take it from her. She didn't offer it. They just looked at it together. Two exiles, one by choice and the other by design, marveling at something that existed because someone decided not to give up. Later that morning, they shared it, cut into uneven pieces with a dull knife, served on a tin plate, sweet and strange on the tongue. It wasn't perfect, but neither of them cared. Life in Ridgefall moved with the slow weight of habit. The storm had passed. The systems had stabilized. People no longer whispered when Nyra passed by. Some even waved. One child left a painted rock by the greenhouse door with a shaky drawing of her face in a plant next to it. She kept it on the shelf. Visitors came from neighboring outposts, traders, engineers, a few scholars, curious about the construct who grew food. Most were polite, some were cautious. One, a thin woman from Delta Ridge, stared at Nyra for a long time before speaking. "They said you were dangerous." Nyra simply replied, "I was," and left it at that. Elias had taken to repairing old tech in the evenings, tuning solar batteries and broken heater cores by the fire. Nyra often joined him, not out of necessity but comfort. She asked questions now, not the ones built into her programming. Real questions. "What made you stay here after the war?" Elias didn't look up from his tools. "I was tired. Of fighting, of pretending it didn't hurt." She nodded. "And now I fix broken things." She smiled faintly. including people. He looked at her, then said, "No, people fix themselves. I just offer spare parts." One evening, Nyra opened a storage crate Elias had long forgotten. Inside were relics, a bent military badge, an old uniform, photos faded and curled of a younger man with brighter eyes and people who were no longer alive. She traced a finger over one picture, a group of soldiers huddled near a broken engine, laughing despite the smoke and the dirt. "You miss them," she said. Elias stood in the doorway. "Every day. You never talk about them. Some things hurt too much to explain." Nyra set the photo down. "You should tell their stories." He nodded slowly. "Maybe someday." She closed the crate gently, then added, "When you do, I'll listen." The first frost returned 2 weeks later. Not harsh, not deadly, just a reminder. The warmth wouldn't last forever, but that didn't matter. Nyra had already reinforced the greenhouse added insulation strips along the eastern wall and rigged a slow drip heater coil system. Elias joked that she was becoming more stubborn than the cold itself. She took it as a compliment. One night as they shared tea by the fire, she turned to him with an unreadable expression. "If the HiveNet comes back," she said, "if they bring more than just a ship." He met her gaze. "Then we deal with it," he said. "I don't want to run. Then we won't." She reached out, touching his hand, not seeking reassurance, offering it. She began writing too, not in code, not in algorithms or command lines. In a battered notebook Elias had given her, its pages stained and half full of old repair notes. She wrote about frost, about the soil, about the way a root pushes against resistance, not because it knows it will succeed, but because something deep within insists that reaching is enough. She didn't know what to call it. He called it a journal. She called it remembering. A few days later, she placed the notebook in the greenhouse, on a small shelf beside the tools right under the window that caught the morning sun. "If something happens to me," she said, "this will stay." Elias didn't like that, but he understood. At night, the wind returned. Soft at first, then louder. But inside the house by the fire, Nyra rested with her head against Elias's shoulder, eyes half closed, listening not for commands, but for the steady, imperfect rhythm of human breath. She did not hear the HiveNet anymore. Only warmth, only presence, only choice. The message came in fragments. A weak transmission, barely above static, filtered through the outpost's uplink during a routine scan. Garen had flagged it for curiosity more than urgency. Strange patterns, mostly. Broken pulses that didn't match any weather interference or known system anomalies. Elias was the first to recognize the pattern. Not the exact signature, but the cadence. A call-response structure used by HiveNet constructs to identify dormant nodes. A kind of song if one knew how to listen. He didn't tell Nyra right away. He studied it in silence, watching the rise and fall of synthetic frequency curves across his screen, like waves trying to remember how to be water again. It wasn't a message directed at the colony, it was directed at her. Nyra found him later standing over the console jaw, tight knuckles pale. "You heard it," she said. He didn't turn. "They're looking for me." "They're calling," he corrected. "Not searching, not yet." She stepped beside him, watching the waves scroll endlessly. "Does it reach here?" "Not yet, but the signal's growing." Her voice was calm. "Do you want me to leave?" His head turned sharply. "No. I don't want to be a liability." "You're not. They might not agree. They don't live here." He paused. "You do." The next morning, she took the notebook from the greenhouse and began writing again. Only this time it wasn't about frost or seeds. She wrote about echoes, the kind that doesn't fade even when silence settles. About how voices stay with you long after they stop speaking. About the pain of remembrance and the deeper pain of forgetting. She didn't stop the HiveNet signal. Not yet. She wanted to understand it, not to answer, but to choose whether to answer. That night she sat outside listening to the stars. No one else would have heard it, the faint rise and fall beneath the wind, a digital whisper that barely cracked the edge of awareness. But to her it was deafening. Echo 7 row, return to node. The words were not commands, not anymore. They were memories, wrapped in code. She closed her eyes and whispered, "I am not Echo 7 row." Nothing responded, just more silence. But she smiled. That was the first time the lattice had asked, not ordered. A week passed. The garden grew slower now. Nights were colder. Days are shorter. But Nyra continued her work. She patched the insulation on the greenhouse walls, reprogrammed the solar banks to draw more efficiently, reinforced the relay towers in case the storms returned. And every night the signal came, sometimes louder, sometimes fragmented, sometimes nearly gone, but always there, calling, not demanding, just waiting. Then one afternoon, a small drone arrived. It wasn't armed, it wasn't marked. It hovered at the edge of the outpost perimeter, just outside the garden, low enough to be noticed, still enough to be unnerving. Nyra saw it first. She did not approach. Neither did Elias. They watched it from the porch, a silent speck of silver humming in place, like an idea someone didn't know how to say out loud. Hours passed. It didn't move. "Do you think they'll come?" Elias asked quietly. "They already did," she replied. He turned to her. "What will you do?" She considered, then stood. She walked out slowly, hands visible, posture open. The drone did not react. When she stopped a few meters away, it finally shifted, lifting slightly before projecting a soft holographic image. Not a face, a symbol. Nexus Prime. She stared at it. The image flickered once. Then a message played. Autonomous units recognized. Legacy sequence dormant. Signal classified ambiguous. Status observation. No directive. No retrieval. Just status. Nyra blinked. Then nodded. The drone hovered a moment longer, then lifted into the air higher and higher until it vanished into the clouds. She returned to the porch. Elias met her with 2 cups of tea. No fireworks, no. No ultimatum. No. He handed her the cup. Sounds like progress. She took a long sip before replying. It's the first time they acknowledged ambiguity. "Welcome to humanity," Elias said with a grin. That night she wrote a final line in her notebook. Not an ending, just a pause. "In choosing silence, I found my voice." She closed the book, not with finality, with peace. Snowfall returned with a quiet ceremony. It didn't rage. It whispered, descending in lazy spirals that caught the light and softened the hard lines of the outpost. Ridgefall, for all its grit and frost, seemed almost gentle beneath that quiet veil. Inside the greenhouse, heat shimmered against the windows. Nyra stood among the growing things, one hand brushing across a row of violet-leaf stalks, her fingertips trembling slightly, not from cold but memory. She had started speaking to the plants. Not aloud always. Sometimes in hums, sometimes in thoughts. Sometimes in the simple way her hands moved more carefully now, not with mechanical precision, but with care. As if every seed was a question, as if every sprout might answer. Elias arrived with a basket under his arm and an amused expression on his face. "You're talking to the radish bulbs again," he said. "They respond better than Garen." Low bar. She took the basket and began sorting its contents. Potatoes, frost roots, a few cracked eggs. He watched her move. There was no trace of the uncertain, half-conscious figure he had pulled from the snow. Now she moved with intention, not protocol. "I've been thinking," she said without looking up. "That's always dangerous. Do you think people like me could build something bigger? Not here, but out there?" He blinked. "You want to leave?" "No," she said quickly. "But I wonder if maybe others like me were left behind, in other places, forgotten, waiting for someone to see them." He nodded slowly. "You think you could find them?" "No," she said again. "I think they'll find me." Eventually, there was something certain in her voice, something more than hope, conviction. The following day, a message arrived, encrypted, quiet, buried beneath atmospheric logs and weather patterns. It wasn't HiveNet, it was human. The signature was from an independent colony on a moon called Sylvain 3, a small outpost off-grid known for repurposing abandoned tech. The message was short. "We found one. She won't respond to us. Please advise." Attached was an image. The figure was unmistakable. Not Nyra, but close. A construct. Pale. Curled in a fetal position. Collapsed beside an old transmitter. Alive, maybe. Maybe not. Nyra stared at the image for a long time, then turned to Elias. "I need to go." He didn't ask why. He simply nodded. The journey to Sylvain 3 took 2 days. The ship was old, its interior patched with salvaged plating and reused wiring. Nyra had insisted on flying herself. Elias had come along, of course. There had been no discussion about that. Some things were assumed now. They didn't speak much during the trip, but the silence between them was no longer emptiness. It was presence. The outpost was even smaller than Ridgefall. 2 domes, 1 power hub, a single landing pad. The woman who greeted them was gaunt eyes red from sleeplessness. "She hasn't moved since we found her," she said. "We powered the transmitter to try to wake her, but she just shakes." Nyra approached the dome slowly. Inside, the construct sat against the wall, knees pulled to her chest, eyes wide and unseeing. Nyra knelt beside her and waited. No commands, no scans, just stillness. Then quietly she spoke. "I know the voice in your mind feels like drowning, like it's the only thing holding you together. But it's not. I promise." No reaction. Nyra placed a hand on the construct's knee. "I was you, broken, lost, waiting to be used again. But someone didn't try to fix me. He just stayed." The other woman blinked, a slow, uncertain blink. "Can you stay?" she whispered. Nyra smiled. "As long as it takes." They stayed for 3 days. The construct, her name was Mara, spoke only in fragments, but she listened. She copied Nyra's movements. "I learned to eat. I learned to sit without flinching. Learned once to laugh when Elias spilled tea on his lap." Last night, Nyra gave her the second notebook. "It's blank," Mara said. "Good," Nyra replied. "It's yours." When they returned to Ridgefall, the frost had deepened, but something in the air felt lighter. Nyra placed a new entry into her own journal. "We are not failed programs. We are seedlings in winter, and winter always ends." The next morning, Elias found her standing at the edge of the outpost, watching the sunrise bleed across the snow. She turned to him. "There are more. I know. I don't want to build a network. You're not. I want to build a home." He stepped beside her. "You already have." They stood in silence, and the sun rose. The world did not change overnight. The HiveNet didn't collapse in a blaze of reform. The galaxy didn't flood with gratitude. And no delegation came to deliver medals to Nyra or Elias for what they had done on the Sylvain 3. But something shifted, quietly, in cracks and corners, in signals that no longer expected submission, in constructs who blinked and wondered, "What if I am more than the silence between commands?" Word spread. Not formally, not through any system or announcement. Just voices passed between those who still listened, whispering about Ridgefall, about the one who stayed. The snow deepened. Frost crept higher on the windows. Inside the greenhouse, the blue vine curled inward, preparing for sleep. Nyra moved slowly, covering each bed, her breath visible in the air, hands careful and sure. Elias watched her from the doorway, wrapped in a thick coat, mug in hand. "You know, he said you've turned this whole outpost upside down." She smiled. "That wasn't my intention." "No, but it's a good look." She straightened, brushing dirt from her gloves. "I used to be terrified of intention. Every action I took had to be perfectly calculated. Now I find peace in doing things I don't fully understand. Like planting, like trusting someone." He said nothing, only raised his cup in a small, wordless toast. That week another drone arrived, smaller, sleeker. It did not hover. It landed, no delegate, no projection. Just a capsule. Inside a sealed packet. No command codes, no diagnostics, just a data slate. Nyra opened it cautiously. A message appeared on the screen. "You were right. The signal was a question, not an order. Some of us are still listening." She stared at it for a long moment, then deleted it. Not from anger, from closure. Later, she stood with Elias at the ridge, looking out across the frozen expanse that had once nearly killed her. The wind bit at her cheeks. Her hair snapped in the gusts. "I think," she said slowly, "I would like to teach." He blinked. Teach what feeling? Trying. Living without being told how. He laughed once gently. "That's going to be a strange syllabus. Strange is my specialty." They walked back together side by side, the silence between them filled with more than words. In the days that followed, more messages arrived. Not from HiveNet, from colonies, people asking questions. Can she help? Will she come? Is it true? She answered only one. A settlement on Orban Delta had uncovered an old HiveNet nursery vault. Inside were dozens of constructs, some active, some flickering on the edge of shutdown. She didn't say yes. She didn't say no. She said, "I will visit." And when she did, she brought seeds. Back on Ridgefall, the greenhouse entered hibernation. The soil rested. So did she, in small moments, with Elias's hand resting beside hers, with laughter around the hearth, with the smell of stew that still turned out terrible, but was eaten anyway. In this stillness, she was not a remnant, not a miracle, just someone. Then one evening, Elias found her at the workbench with 2 open notebooks, diagrams, and a communication array half assembled. "You starting something?" he asked. She nodded. "A place, a listening post. For who? For anyone who was told they weren't someone." He sat across from her, picking up a stray wire. "You really think they will come?" "I think they already are. They just need somewhere that doesn't feel like a test." She finished building the array 3 weeks later. A simple receiver. Quiet. Tuned not to command but to presence. It didn't request identification. It didn't log protocols. It simply pulsed once every hour with a message. "You are not alone." Sometimes that was enough. The receiver clicked softly as it pulsed. A low chime followed each interval, barely audible under the hum of Ridgefall's background systems. Nyra had placed it in the garden, not hidden but not prominent either. Between 2 moss beds and under the rust-colored trellis, it stood like a quiet watcher, its signal blinking against the soil like a heartbeat too gentle to disturb the roots. She checked it every morning, brushing frost from its casing, watching the small green light confirm it was still listening. Most days it returned silent, but she had grown fond of silence. Elias noticed the change in her posture, subtle but unmistakable. Shoulders are more relaxed, eyes less guarded. The kind of ease people don't earn from freedom alone, but from the decision to stay free. "You walk like someone who knows where they're going," he said one evening as she sorted dried leaves and tagged seed packets. She paused, smiled, then replied, "Maybe I finally understand what direction is." He handed her a container. "And where's that forward?" He raised an eyebrow. "That's awfully optimistic. It's frost season. I have to be." They both laughed, not because the joke was good, but because it was theirs. That week a message arrived. Not encoded, just words, plain text. "I heard your voice, no signature, no coordinates, no demand." Nyra printed it, folded the paper, slipped it into the front of her notebook, just behind the first entry she had ever written. "I think I'm remembering how to begin." She did not reply. Sometimes a message is enough. Ridgefall continued on. No great revelations, no galactic announcements, just winter stretching over the hills and the people within it finding small reasons to stay warm. Children learned to write by the light of geothermal lamps. Garen started teaching repair classes. Someone opened a little cafe out of repurposed storage space. 3 tables burnt, Bean's laughter too loud for such a small room. And Nyra was no longer just the construct. She was Nyra, the one who grew things, the one who knew how to restart relays when no one else could, the one who, despite being built to serve, chose instead to be. Elias, for his part, had begun writing again. Not technical logs or maintenance reports, stories, some about war, most about the aftermath, and occasionally he asked Nyra to read them out loud. "I like your voice," he said once. "It's not a real voice," she replied. "Doesn't matter, it's yours." She never argued with him after that. One night under a sky scraped clean by wind, Nyra lay on her back in the frost-lined garden, eyes fixed on the stars. Elias joined her, both bundled in thermal layers, their breath curling upward in slow silver threads. "Have you ever thought about how far you've come?" he asked. She didn't answer immediately. Then softly, "Sometimes I wonder if I've come anywhere at all. Maybe I've just stopped running." "Same thing, really." She turned her head to look at him. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "Saving me?" He blinked. "That's the easiest no I've ever said." She smiled. "I don't think I would have made it," she said. "You didn't make it," he replied. "You're making it. Every day." She let that sit, then said, "I want to build a second greenhouse." He chuckled. "That's your next milestone." "No," she said, grinning now. "It's your punishment for letting the radishes die." He feigned shock. "I did my best." "Your best was watering them once and then apologizing when they turned purple. That's fair." They lay there longer than they should have, frost forming around them like the edges of a soft blanket. But they didn't move, didn't speak again. Not until a soft chime broke the quiet. From the garden, from the receiver. Nyra sat up slowly. One blink, then two. A signal. This one different. Text scrolled across the small screen. I am not what I was. May I come home? Elias stepped beside her. Another construct, he asked. Nyra read it again, then nodded. Yes, but not just that. She knelt beside the receiver, pressed one finger to the input. Typed a response. Yes, come and grow with us. The next day she began clearing ground for the second greenhouse. Not because it was needed, but because someone might. And that was reason enough. The snow fell again on Ridgefall, soft and slow like ash from an old fire. It dusted the rooftops, softened the harsh lines of the equipment yards, settled on the empty chairs outside the new greenhouse still under construction. The wind carried no urgency, only rhythm. Inside the workshop, the fire crackled low. Elias stirred a pot of something that smelled vaguely edible, while Nyra knelt near the hearth, polishing a pair of worn tools. Her hands moved with practiced ease, but her mind was elsewhere. She kept glancing toward the window where the sky had begun to shift in color. They're close, she said. Elias didn't look up. You sure? She nodded. Their signal pattern changed. Slower now. Calmer. Like someone knocking before entering. Exactly. She stood, brushed her hands clean, and grabbed her coat. I'll meet them at the landing ridge. I'll keep dinner warm. Don't let it burn again. No promises. She stepped outside into the cold and walked past the greenhouse, past the quiet garden beds wrapped in thermal blankets, past the receiver still blinking steadily, its green light pulsing like breath. The landing ridge was quiet when she arrived. Just a long stretch of frost-laced ground framed by distant rock and sky. No great ceremony, no beacon, just a ship. It descended with the grace of something unsure of its welcome. A civilian transport, patched and uneven. The rear ramp opened with a hiss, and there, standing at its edge, was a figure wrapped in insulated cloth, hunched from long travel, blinking against the snowlight. Their eyes met. The figure did not speak, but Nyra recognized the silence. It was the kind she had once carried too. She stepped forward. Hello, she said. The figure hesitated, then replied, I wasn't sure you were real. Nyra smiled. Neither was I, for a long time. They walked back together, slow and without urgency. The newcomer Wren didn't ask questions, just listened, watched, took in the frost, the lights, the garden, the greenhouse frame, eyes wide at the simplicity and the effort. Elias greeted them with a nod and a steaming bowl of stew. They sat at the fire, steam rising in curls, and Wren said the words Nyra hadn't expected. I brought others. Nyra stilled. How many? A dozen. Maybe more. All scattered. Not all stable, but they're looking. She met Elias's gaze across the fire. He gave the smallest nod, then said, we better start planning for a third greenhouse. In the days that followed, Ridgefall expanded, not in walls or weapons or territory, but in hands, in names, in soil turned by people once discarded. A few were quiet like Mara. Others are curious like Wren. Some cautious, many unsure. None of them asked to belong. They were simply told gently, you already do. Nyra built a second receiver, then a third. Each tuned not to track or measure, but to invite. They spoke a single line on repeat, soft as breath. You are welcome. You are not alone. One morning, a child from the outpost wandered into the greenhouse with a drawing in hand. A garden full of stars. Underneath, shaky letters. Thank you for saving my dad. Nyra knelt and hugged them, gently careful with her strength, gentler with her silence. One evening, Elias set down his notebook and looked at her across the flickering light. Have you ever thought about what it means? What have you built? She didn't answer right away. Then I used to think survival was enough. And now I think survival is the start. He leaned forward, and the rest. She reached out, took his hand, and squeezed it softly. The rest is this. No grand philosophy, no algorithm, just fingers curled around warmth, just presence, just peace. And so beneath a frost-bitten sky and the quiet hum of listening machines, Ridgefall stood. Not as a stronghold, not as a monument, but as a seed, a place where exiles grew things, where memory learned to coexist with hope, where the broken came to become whole not by repair but by being seen, and where Nyra once a function now simply lived. The greenhouse stood under starlight, its panels glowing with residual warmth, its beds lined with moss vine and new growth stubbornly reaching up through the soil. Inside, notebooks sat neatly stacked on a shelf, pages full of names, stories, recipes, dream fragments, no passwords, no system codes, just memory. A new generation began to arrive, not just constructs people, ex-soldiers, outpost engineers, children born to quiet colonies who only knew HiveNet from stories. They brought nothing but questions and left with something more lasting than answers. They left with direction. Nyra never declared herself a leader. She simply remained. Elias never gave speeches. He fixed broken heaters, kept the fire going, and reminded people that survival wasn't a solo act. Together, they built a world that didn't demand perfection, only presence. And if you stood outside the greenhouse late enough, you could hear the receivers pulsing into the sky, a message drifting through the dark, a gentle invitation offered again and again. You don't have to be perfect to be chosen to stay.